I'm tired of playing that role. I'm tired of being the black guy who has to call bullshit on the race narrative that's being foisted on the country by the hustlers and the charlatans and the ambulance chasers and the rabble-rousers and the would-be faux radicals and the anti-white, anti-American, race-obsessed quarter of the commentariat. I'm tired of that. I want race to be over, and I don't want race to be over. I want the belly aching, the excuse making, the whining, the crying, the handout, gimme, gimme, gimme to be over. But I don't want that warm glow that I get when I think about growing up on the South Side, or that I get when I'm listening to a jazz track that I really, really like, or that I get when I'm eating soul food, or that I get when I'm thinking about W.E.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass, and when I'm reading poetry or reading a James Baldwin essay, and I feel I identify with a certain noble tradition. It's a part of Americana, to be sure, but it's its own corner, and it's my corner. And I don't want to give that up. I don't want to stop being black, even though I don't want my blackness to be the main thing about me that anybody identifies when they see me, or the main thing that I think about when I get out of bed in the morning. Hello, everybody. This is Glenn Loury, and you are tuned into The Glenn Show. I am with John McWhorter, my conversation partner every other week here at The Glenn Show. John's a professor at Columbia University, and he writes regularly for the New York Times. I teach at Brown University, and I am John Paulson Senior Fellow at the Manhattan Institute. So, welcome, John, back. Welcome back.
Yes, great to be here, Glenn. I should tell our audience that if I seem a little bit less than 100% today, it's because, believe it or not, my back hurts. It's like Glenn is giving it to me. And so I'm on some muscle relaxants and stuff. And on top of that, I have a bit of a cold, which means that if I sneeze, it hurts my back, that sort of thing. So that's why I seem like I don't want to be here. I do want to be here. I'm just a little less than myself.
We're so glad you're here, John. Thanks for enduring the sufferings necessary to show up.
One must.
I know how it is. I do know how it is. Had a massive back surgery myself last year, and am still in the late stages of recovery and rehabilitation. And that was 9 months ago. But don't wait too long to have it attended to. If there's going to be a surgical intervention, I'd rather it become sooner rather than later. I think I waited too long, but that's neither here nor there. We're talking here in early January 2025. It's a new year. It's a new year and it's a new day. Shortly, there will be an inauguration and there'll be a new president. And the wheel is turning, it seems. Things are changing. And, maybe we can reflect a little bit, John, on how we feel about these changes that are going on. One thing I've been thinking about, especially as I was preparing for this conversation, you and I have been talking since 2007, off and on early, but then got regularized. And here we are many years down the road. And we used to be the black guys. Remember the black guys at bloggingheads.tv, Robert Wright's venerable platform, which gave me my start here at the Glenn Show. We were the black guys. And the issue of race and the character of the political discussion about race and racial issues is constantly changing. I thought we might reflect a little bit on where we are now, how things are different than they were some years ago, and what the future holds. I mean, are we ghettoized, you and I, John, as the black guys, or should we be diversifying our portfolio of topical interests, anticipating the waning of this race obsession that has characterized at least one corner of American culture? What do you think?
I look at myself as having been a little naive 20 years ago, in that I would have thought in about 2007 that it had become an assumption among enlightened people, even, that when it comes to the effects of racism on the Black community and disparities between Black people and people of other races, that it is partly a matter of the system, but that equally important is that there are cultural differences between groups, and that all aspects of no group are not, there's a bad sentence, that's the muscle relaxants, okay, and that no group's cultural traits are all good. And just because we had slavery and Jim Crow doesn't mean that Black people's cultural traits are all productive. I thought that was a consensus that the conversation had gradually come to. And once Obama got in and a certain kind of exaggeration about racism became ordinary, and then especially once social media comes in with Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown, and then peak woke in the late teens, et cetera, I thought, no, that's not the common consensus. And now we've gotten past peak woke, at least outside of humanities and social sciences and the arts. But I'm not sure, Glenn. I think what people value us for, and I think there are a lot of Black people and leftist whites who probably despise us for it. But what we're for is showing that you can be a Black and Black identified person and understand that there is a vast and frankly often egregious exaggeration of the role of racism in society. Part of our job is to make that clear without being dismissive, without pretending that race doesn't matter at all. Like both of us think about it. But I think a lot of people listen to us with relief. And I think that is definitely true of the white male among our listenership. And frankly, I think that they're right. I think we're doing a service, and that they should go out into the world and repeat that it's not as bad as people like to say, and that Black people need to be treated as grown-ups and not children. We might have to keep doing that. And I know what you mean, that it seems like maybe it's getting to be an old groove. And I know what you mean. I know your implication is that it gets a little dull sometimes. But maybe I'm not saying that we are the center of the world, but maybe there need to be voices like ours. And I don't know if that's going to stop being necessary just because we're past the ridiculousness of 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll say for my own part, I'm tired of playing that role. Um, I'm tired of being the Black guy who has to call bullshit on the race narrative that's being foisted on the country by the hustlers and the charlatans and the ambulance chasers and the rabble rousers and the would-be faux radicals and the anti-white, anti-American, race-obsessed quarter of the commentariat. I'm tired of that. I want race to be over, and I don't want race to be over. I want the belly aching, the excuse making, the whining, the crying, the handout, gimme, gimme, gimme to be over. But I don't want that warm glow that I get when I think about growing up on the South Side, or that I get when I'm listening to a jazz track that I really, really like, or that I get when I'm eating soul food, or that I get when I'm thinking about W.B. Du Bois and Frederick Douglass and so on, when I'm reading the poetry or reading a James Baldwin essay or whatever, and I feel I identify with a certain noble tradition. It's a part of Americana, to be sure, but it's its own corner, and it's my corner, And I don't want to give that up. I don't want to stop being Black, even though I don't want my Blackness to be the main thing about me that anybody identifies when they see me, or the main thing that I think about when I get out of bed in the morning. But I don't want race to be over, although I want racial grift to be over, something like that. I'm not catching it exactly, but I'm ambivalent. I'm ambivalent about the turning of the wheel, because I do feel that the wheel is turning. America is such a fast moving place. And, we're well into the 21st century now. And, all the talk is about Vivek Ramaswamy or whatever. And, the Chinese are coming, and the country is more Latinos. Well, into the 21st century and into the forefront of human civilization, I mean, and the Latinos are coming. I mean, the Mexican and the Central American and so on. I was thinking about what am I going to do in my retirement. I know I'm rambling, John. Thanks for letting me ramble.
That's all right.
And learning how to speak the Spanish language, or at least how to understand it when it's spoken to me, doesn't seem like a bad use of my time. For example, I just give that as an example because I want to be in America. I want to stay in touch with what's happening in my country. So I'm confused, obviously.
No, you're right. I don't want race to be over. I can't conceive of that. That's why, with Coleman and Camille, I get where they're coming from, but I'm kind of bemused, and it makes me feel kind of old. But yeah, same thing. The jazz is very important for me. Film, especially going back into the past, and in other ways, like for example, the picture behind me. Some people might wonder what that is. That's Charles Sheeler, who was one of the whitest people in the world. And it's his painting River Rouge Plant, and it's of the River Rouge Plant in Detroit. The reason I like it is because, one, the first time I saw it at the Whitney, it almost made me cry, and I'm not that type. There's just something about the starkness of it. There are no people in it. It's just the factory. And also, that factory hired a lot of black men in the 20s, and a lot of black men would, spend like an hour and a half on the trolley to get to it. And I always think of that when I think this is what people do when, you need the work and there's no such thing as not working. That's what black people did. And they were black people living in the time of lynching. So I always look at that and I think that's the way it could be. Not that I'm wishing that life on anyone, but it was different then than it is for many, many people now in terms of attitudes towards how legitimate a person is if they're not working full time. And that's now, but to your point, that's now no longer a racialized issue. That is something you can talk about with white men of a certain demographic now, every bit as much as you could black men. The days of talking about the black underclass, I would think that that's becoming rather obsolete. There is an underclass and it's white and black. Not as much Latino, not Asian, but it's the fentanyl meth world, which is this white world, and then this quote unquote ghetto world that we've been talking about, which is actually a better place now than it was 30 years ago. Now I'm rambling, but no, the issue though is having to get rid of the grifters. And as you know, I don't think these people are grifters. They're just caught up in a very psychologically comfortable way of thinking where you are the eternal victim. The irony is that feels good, especially if your life is actually going pretty well. But yeah, it can be a monotonous groove after a while. For example, it's not Spanish, but I'm always trying to teach myself some language. And I hate to say it's not Swahili. For me, the one I'm always kind of knocking at is Russian because it's unlearnable as much as I love it. And then Mandarin, which is unlearnable as much as I love it. And, when I wake up in the morning, I'm not thinking about writing a piece about Claudine Gay. I'm not thinking about writing a piece where I say, no, that's not racism. I wake up thinking about any number of things. Often it's Bugs Bunny or it's my daughters or something like that. Then there's this thing that you and I have to do, which has its pleasures. But yeah, for me, it's a duty. And I do it, with a salute. But it's a duty. It's not my essence. And yeah, as time passes, you start to think, this is an increasingly small sliver of what I process as life and existence. Sure, yeah.
Do you think that the events of 2024, I think especially, of course, of the reemergence of Donald Trump after he won that election and his coalition, bespeaks a change, a substantive transformation of the sensibilities of the country around racial issues? Is DEI, which went from being everybody had to do it, and they had to read Robin DiAngelo and Ibram Kendi and so on, and they had to have a program at their company or at their college or whatever, and they had to write an op-ed that was sympathetic to the, sentiments of the DEI crowd and whatnot. But it seems to have taken a real significant hit in terms of the reputation, the prestige, the standing of those sentiments. The Supreme Court's landmark decision about affirmative action comes to mind as a transformative event on the legal front. The demographic composition of Trump's coalition that he put together to sweep all of the battleground states, narrowly, but nevertheless, and to come back from almost literally the dead to become president again, seems to be pointing in a different direction. Do you know who Roy, R-U-Y, Teixeira, T-E-X-I-E-R-A is?
I'm in
Have you
touch
been
with
reading
him
his?
sometimes. Yeah.
Oh, are you? Yeah.
And yeah.
The critiques of the, identity politics as a central theme in the Democratic Party pitch to the country. You could almost call it a repudiation. That's a strong word of Kamala Harris's candidacy. I've not heard much griping about, she's a black woman and they rejected her. The country is racist. I'm sure a few people think that, but it's not a leading
hothouse crowd. Yeah, exactly.
It just feels really, really different than 2020.
Mm-hmm.
2024 feels really, really, and I wonder if you think that's right and whether that's a harbinger of things to come. Are we going further and further along this move toward racist? Coleman's book, The End of Race Politics, hasn't done poorly. His star is on the rise. Coleman Hughes, the young writer, African-American, somewhat conservative social critic, writes for Barry Weiss's organ, The Free Press, and others. This is Coleman Hughes, but this sentiment is out there. It's coming from a lot of different directions. I don't know. I have a sense that you remember Stanley Crouch. He was a friend of mine, and when I wrote to him and told him what I was doing at Boston University back in the late '90s, starting a center on race and social division, he said, "Man, race is over. Don't you know race
he
is
always
over?"
said that.
And that was 25 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that this is the most seismic sociopolitical shift I've seen in my mature lifetime. And we all know how I feel about Trump in terms of the specifics. But to be honest, I am heartened that all of those people of color voted for that man, despite knowing that he probably wouldn't want his kids to marry them or their kids. He's a casual bigot based on many things that he says. And I think that that's quite clear. That is not why I disapprove of him so much, but he is. And they don't mind because they understand that that's one aspect of him and there are other things that they prioritize. And they didn't have that sense that if anybody is even a bit of a racist, then they are heretics who, must be, banished from polite society. You couldn't possibly vote for him because he's a racist. That's the view that, many people, hard left, overeducated, etc., have. And I find it immature and reflexive. It shouldn't be about his bigotry. I know that a lot of people really can't stand how much I don't like him, but I'll say once again, it's not because I think that he wouldn't want Ivanka to marry me or my kids. That has nothing to do with it. And I like the way all those others feel that way. I don't think we're seeing a coalition. I think that dream has never happened in America. There's not going to be this cross-racial, class-conscious coalition. Most Latinos feel very different from most Black people, feel very different from most Southeast Asian immigrants, et cetera. You're not going to bring them together. But in terms of how they vote, yeah. And it does mean that at least for, frankly, real people, as opposed to us, real people, race is becoming over in a way. And all those people will happily talk about race, but they don't fetishize it the way you're taught is the most enlightened way of dealing with it. And so it's becoming that you and I are kind of up close and rubbing elbows with a certain kind of person who, at least pretends to think Robin DiAngelo wrote something sensible. And, DEI, et cetera, all of these administrators, God knows why anybody would get a PhD in DEI, writing these thin, monotonous, self-similar dissertations. It's unfortunate, all the energy that's been put into that. That will be around. Those people will have their view, but it's the same thing as how many people and who are they who say Latinx, for example? How many people are going to say, pregnant people, et cetera? As angry as those things get, many, they're just never going to spread beyond a tiny, rarefied little crowd. In a sense, that's not a terrible thing. But it means, are we talking to them or are we talking to the truck driver? And frankly, I think race is much less important to the truck driver than we might think. I live in a neighborhood full of working class Latinos. I overhear the men in particular talking in praise of Trump all the time. It's not just a few. This is a Trumpy neighborhood, and I would never have expected that 6 years ago. It's also that way in similar Black neighborhoods. It's huge.
This is in Queens, right?
This is Jackson Heights in Queens, which has, a little bit of just about everybody, but the dominant, it's Bangladeshis and Latinos. I don't know how the Bangladeshis feel because I don't know their language and I don't see them. But, in terms of where I get my hair cut, some people who I know socially, the fact that I can understand Spanish. This is a Trump neighborhood in those segments, at least half, I would say. No flags up, no signs. Nobody does that. Very few. But it's a neighborhood where people kind of quietly and even not so quietly voted for him. Yeah, definitely.
Like it or not, the news we consume profoundly shapes how we see the world. With countless agendas competing for our attention, having the right tools to uncover bias, break free from big tech algorithms, and escape echo chambers has never been more important. That's where Ground News comes in. It's the website and app I rely on daily to stay informed, to cut through the noise and to get closer to the truth. Visit ground.news/Glenn Show to see for yourself how it works. My favorite feature of Ground News is the blind spot feed. It shows you stories that are disproportionately reported by either the left or the right. I find it really helpful for gaining a balanced perspective in our hyper-polarized world. To show you what I mean, here's a story that's ignored by left-leaning outlets. More than 50% of New York City hate crimes aimed at Jews, NYPD. And here's one that's mostly reported by the left, with almost no coverage on the right. More than 15,000 doctors urge Senate to reject RFK Jr. as health secretary. For both of these, and for every story, Ground News gives you a breakdown of the sources covering it, the bias of the media outlets reporting across the left, center, and right, how reliable these sources have been in the past, and who owns them. This is the kind of news analysis you won't find anywhere else. Right now, my viewers can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan, which is the same plan I use. Make sure you subscribe using my link at ground.news/Glenn Show. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code when signing up. That's ground.news/Glenn Show.
I think another indication in the same direction is this conflict that's broken out amongst the Trump team about the H-1B visas and the Indian engineers and computer scientists and whatnot coming and taking jobs in tech. And Vivek Ramaswamy criticizing American culture, whatever he might mean by that, and extolling the virtues of South Asian culture, again, whatever that means, on the question of acquiring the skills necessary to succeed in the tech environment. And we need these people offshore coming in because we're not producing enough qualified people of our own. And the reason is a cultural reason. And so we need more visas. And Elon Musk saying, this is an issue that's important to me. We need more visas. We need competent people. I'm about getting stuff done. I don't have time for all this pussyfooting and tomfoolery that characteristic of the American thing. And I overheard Steve Bannon vituperating. I do not listen to Steve Bannon. I was listening to something that I overheard. My wife was listening to something of somebody playing an outtake from Steve. Okay, I just want to be clear about that. But man, he was foaming at the mouth, Bannon, on the question of you have a dynamic sector of your economy and you're bringing people in offshore because you're saying they're more qualified when the real task is to make our own people fit for the et cetera, et cetera. And of course, he wasn't talking about Black people being squeezed out because of bias or profiteering or un-American disinterest in cultivating human talent here onshore. He was mainly talking about Americans. He didn't exclude Black people, Bannon, but it was the kind of lament that you might have associated with an anti-racist sentiment, but it was being expressed on behalf of the core mainstream heart of the American workforce. It's white people who are on the butt end of Vivek Ramaswamy's criticism when he says American culture sucks. Why do you celebrate the prom queen more than you do the calculus champion, et cetera? And it seemed to me that bespeaks a transracial merging of perception and sensibility that is class-driven, not race-driven. And that's not a bad thing in my view. Whatever I don't have a position on the H-1B visa thing. I don't know enough about it to really have a well-calculated retort to Vivek and Elon. But it interests me, and I think it does bespeak a turning of the wheel. You know, J.D. Vance could end up being president of the United States in a few years. Well, he's vice president, and Trump is only going to serve for 4 years. And the sentiments of hillbilly elegy could have a resonance in our popular culture. And that would not be a racial thing. That would be a transracial thing or whatever. What do you think?
Well, if somebody can figure out how, within the space of a generation, we could get enough white or Black or any other native-born Americans to fill those positions quickly, then I'd like to hear it. And in the meantime, you know, we are an immigrant nation, as they say in Hamilton, immigrants get things done. what it looks like is that we're seeing a certain cultural bent among, for example, the South Asians that Vivek is referring to. And frankly, it's always going to be that way, that some cultures do some things more and better than other cultures, partly for chance reasons, maybe partly because of specific aspects of that culture, and that's going to include Black culture. And, maybe it's gotten to the point that white culture, whatever that is one that is not especially prepared to fill jobs like that in very large numbers, in which case there are plenty of people who will come here and have children who will become, quote unquote, American within a single generation, and then they'll be their grandchildren. It's the same old thing. And there are always people sitting experiencing the new version of it who think of it as different from the way it was before. It's just the same old story. But yeah, it's a very different story than you might have expected from the same sorts of people. He tried to get in touch with me, Ramaswamy, and I must admit.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, and I was polite, but I just, well, no. That's
when he was still a candidate, or
would you have taken him up or let him take you up?
I don't think so. I mean, I was watching him from afar and was moderately impressed with his erudition and
he's brilliant.
The way he presented himself and whatnot. I think he's an interesting phenomenon. But no,
I just wondered, and I wondered if he had contacted you, but
no, he didn't.
Yeah, that is my take on that particular issue. Although we're kind of in the middle of that news story, but yeah, that's what I've been.
All this talk about culture, it's so unscientific. Gives me the willies. I mean, for example, the Indian migration here to the United States is very selective. It's not a random draw on the subcontinent's population. It's people who come here to go to graduate school and stay on, or
speaking English.
They're mostly Brahmins. They're speaking English practically as a native language, which makes them different from
most Indians don't speak English, but we would be surprised to know it based on the ones that we meet here. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I reckon that most well-educated Indians do speak English.
They do. Yeah.
So what we mean by culture is, and identifying that with a geographic population, a national population, when you've got such non-random selectivity going on in terms of what you're looking at, just gives me a little pause. Also, I think the competitiveness of globalization, that if you want to get ahead, you got to, in tech, you got to be up in the top right tail of the distribution of human performance. And if you want to be in the right tail, you have to work your ass off. You have to.
And there are no excuses.
And you can't keep your nose to the grindstone. You have to actually exert a lot of effort. And the idea that if I'm going to have a good job, I've got to spend 12, 15 years, 60-hour weeks, with my nose to the grindstone, might be very hard for a lot of people to accept. And the idea that if I don't do that, this guy over here who's coming from South Asia with an H-1B visa is going to get the job and not me. That might be hard for people to take.
Yeah, it is. And there's a Black aspect to that too, in some stories that you see coming out of Silicon Valley, where you can see that our current running tacit idea that it's wrong to subject Black people to the same standards as everyone else. The idea being that racism means that you've got to give us a pass to a certain extent. Standards are going to be different for us. And, nobody says that outright. But it's kind of part of being an educated American to assume that. That doesn't work out there because, you can't, there's no Black way to do it. Either you're doing it right, either you're doing it excellently, or you're not. There's no way to bend it. It's not like doing history or art or something like that. And I can see that can make a person uncomfortable, a Black person uncomfortable, because we are trained to think that the standards are going to be different, and or that our job is to look around us and try to identify racism in the industry and be the whistleblower, and to show that recognition technology sometimes, does what you might call racist things. And some of those things aren't important. But there comes a point when if you are going to get that job that you're talking about, there's certain things you have to do that have nothing to do with your color, where nobody is going to give you a pass. There are no excuses, and there's no room for changing standards and arguing what the standards are. You just got to do it. That's going to be hard, especially, I think, for Black Americans, because of the way we're raised to think and have been since the 70s about standards and how much can reasonably expected of us given our history. I hope that Black Americans in Silicon Valley get past that quickly. I hope that after a generation, there are people who understand you've just got to do the work the way everybody else does, because there won't be any other way for there to be a foothold there. And in the meantime, it's going to be immigrants who just do the work.
Change the subject here. Luigi Mangione, folk hero.
Mm-hmm.
Comment.
Social media, because Timothy McVeigh wasn't bad looking either, but you couldn't have him, on your phone. And
that could be a headline. Timothy McVeigh wasn't bad looking either.
It would have been the same thing with him. But this guy, he's good looking, and he's this hero, killing this father, in cold blood. But the idea is that there's something sexy about that because we're experiencing it at a remove. It's the same thing as how mean certain kinds of people got on Zoom and Slack in 20 and 21, because a lot of those firings and defenestrations were because those discussions were not in actual rooms. Same thing here. People, especially if you don't live in New York, where like you've walked by that place, hundreds of times, you're watching it as a show. And you think, well, he's cute and it's kind of a movie, and who knew who that executive was? And so it's all symbolic and it's a movie. It's highly immature, unfortunately. I immediately thought, the kids, like, that man is dead. Where's daddy? They're going to suffer from that for the rest of their lives. But what everybody else thought is the shooter is cute and the healthcare industry is evil. And therefore, let's make this a John Ford movie and print the legend. No, I thought it was pathetic.
I was reading Matt Taibbi, the journalist, Substack the other day, and he was reporting on how Women's Wear Daily covered the arraignment of Luigi Mangione with a description of his outfit.
Oh, no.
The sweater, the pants, and I can't repeat the description, but they went into detail. Moreover, the brand, the color, the cut was sold out at Amazon within hours of...
You're kidding.
No, I'm not
kidding.
People
are dressing as that motherfucker.
There are some people out there who are trying to emulate the look because it's au courant, it's classy, it's the thing. It's the thing. I was at a New Year's Day celebration with a dear friend, and she was regaling me with her admiration for Luigi Mangione. And I kept saying, but it was a despicable act. He murdered someone in cold blood. He shot him in the back. The man did nothing. You don't know anything about the business practices of that guy that could possibly justify his assassination. Look what world you invite if you celebrate people who undertake acts like this. Who do you think it's going to be next? You think you can limit it to healthcare executives, et cetera? And she was like, well, the health insurance industry is killing people by denying their claims. And, all this kind of, I think, nonsense. I mean, you equate the social harm associated with perhaps an ill-considered or profit-motivated denial of a medical insurance claim with the murder of a random executive. I mean, you think this is politics? This is not politics. This is anarchy. You're inviting a world that nobody should really want to see. And yet, that's a sentiment that's out there. And I just wonder what it says about our political culture. And I wonder whether it has something to do with the disappointment that people feel with Trump's reemergence. And maybe I can ask you that question since I know you're disappointed.
It's that's part of it. It's also, it's an aspect of being human to see anti-heroes in that way, which I wasn't aware of until 2001. It was after 9/11, and it was one of the most disappointing things I've ever noticed about human beings, because I could tell that these two people were not unusual. I was talking to two graduate students after 9/11. One of them was an Afghani-American woman, and the other one was a Black Muslim man. And I could tell from little looks they were giving each other, like half sentences and the way they were using adverbs. They kept on saying that it was just terrible what happened. But they didn't really mean it. They were being formulaic. What they really felt, which they said, was that they thought Osama bin Laden had given the world a message. And for them, that was more important than the fact that, 3,000 completely innocent people
Yeah.
died and left families behind. And I thought that is so incredibly heartless. And yet these are not heartless people. They are ordinary, intelligent people. And I'm sure that their sentiment is shared widely. And you found out of the news then that it was, that many Muslims felt that way, and fellow travelers with Muslims, especially whites in Berkeley. I had never experienced that before, and I was deeply dismayed. It was one of the things, in a way, that led me to start being a quote unquote social critic, or at that time kept me doing it. Because I thought, I feel like I'm making sense in the same way that they do. And I don't want to be shouted down. Yeah, it's a tough one, because someone was killed, someone was murdered, their life was snuffed out. And you celebrate because the person did it in a clean way and turns out to be good looking. No, no. And yet I'm sure that woman who you're talking about is a perfectly intelligent,
She
probably
is.
artistically sensitive, academically degreed person. And therefore, she's not rare. She's not unusual. She's representative. And we can see that so clearly with social media. Yeah, it's disappointing. And I'm not saying that there aren't things about me that represent disappointing aspects of humanity, but that is one where I can't share it. And I always feel very much outside of it, the romanticizing of the vigilante. That doesn't work.
John and I often talk about higher education on this podcast. Obviously, that's the universe we both inhabit. And why not? It's a topic that has moved front and center of late at both the state and national level. Free speech on campus, viewpoint diversity on campus, cancel culture on campus, soaring tuition, affirmative action, race-based admissions, accreditation, the erosion of standards, attacks on the classics, hiring litmus tests, critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You name it, it's in the news. So, with all that's going on, and there's a lot going on, to whom can one turn as a trusted resource of all issues related to campus reform, whether you're a student, faculty, trustee, administrator, donor, policymaker, or alumni? One source we want you to know about and strongly recommend as a credible and respected voice on all these issues is the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, or ACTA, whom we're pleased to have supporting this episode. ACTA is on the front lines, promoting academic excellence, academic freedom, and accountability at America's colleges and universities. They don't just serve as trusted advisors to college trustees and alumni, they help arm reformers with resources, ideas, recommendations, information, even grassroots alumni support through their Campus Freedom Initiative. They make positive changes happen, and they approach these issues in a nonpartisan, balanced, informed, highly credible way, which we appreciate. If you care deeply about these issues, as John and I do, you really must know more about the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. Start by looking them up on the web at goacta.org. That's goacta.org. And follow them on Twitter and Facebook. What's on your agenda for 2005? Do you have a to-do list?
I am not writing a book, which is very unusual for me. I might be putting together a special audiobook on the history of musical theater with Malcolm Gladwell's company. I might.
Oh, congratulations. Oh, you might.
Okay. That would be fun. I might help put together a concert version. This will happen at some point. I don't know if it's going to happen in 2025. A concert version of a lost Fats Waller musical, which played Broadway for a year and then was forgotten because he died right afterward. And I have taken it upon myself to be the one person who's gathered together the material and wants to share it with the world. I'm putting together a panel at TED. I asked you about this, and I'm doing that, and that's going to be fun in April.
You're on leave. Are you on leave?
On leave for the whole year with pay. That's the best thing about my Columbia job, full pay. But I need to come up with another book topic, and I want it to be special. I don't want to do anything like what I've done before, But then I also want it to sell. I don't want to go to all that work and have 7 people read it. So there's that. And I'm working on some linguistics stuff, but no huge plans. I'm taking a breather this year.
You're carrying on with the column at the New York Times?
Every week I do that, right. And, that's work. That could be a full-time job, almost. And so I'm going to keep doing that. I'll do that till death, if they'll have me. And, yeah, that's it. What are you going to do?
Well, I'm transitioning out as a professor here at Brown and retiring. I'm going to petition my betters here at the institution for emeritus status so that I can keep my email account and maybe a office off the beaten path where I can collect my books and papers. I have a small book coming out from Polity Press in the United Kingdom on self-censorship, which is a reprint of a classic essay of mine. It's really a matter I'm very proud of. I wrote an essay 30 years ago. It was published in 1994 in James S. Coleman, the late great sociologist journal, Rationality and Society. The essay was called Self-Censorship and Public Discourse, a Theory of Political Correctness. And it met with acclaim, and people have cited it and, praised it for decades. And Polity asked me if I wanted to reissue the essay as a small book with a foreword explaining what's going on, and an afterword in which I talk about self-censorship in contemporary political discourse. And that's coming out, and I'm happy about that. I have an idea for a book. I'm not yet at the point of shopping a proposal, but the idea is to talk about 50 years as a college teacher through cameo examinations of my relationships with particular students.
Like Roland.
Roland Fryer would be one of them, to be sure. I was on his dissertation committee and worked with him and advised him early in his career.
And that piano player.
Exactly. David Sachs is his name. He was an undergraduate at Brown. He's at Stanford Law now in his last year. And he's brilliant. And he's a brilliant pianist, but he's also a brilliant classical scholar and now a student of the law. Brilliant. And he and I developed a course together that we taught out of our independent study. And there are others like him who are outstanding young people who've gone into one or another line of work, not all of them pursuing academic careers, but whom I've taught. But there would be a chapter on a half dozen students. There'd be a chapter on a half dozen teachers, people who had great influence on me. And then be a couple of chapters on collaborative teaching that I've done where I've combined forces with colleagues to offer, for example, for 4 years running, a political scientist named Ashutosh Varshney, Indian political scientist, and I at Brown offered a summer seminar for a couple of weeks for 24 students from all over the world who came to Providence and were in residence, hearing from us and the people whom we invited to supplement our lectures about race, ethnicity, inequality, and conflict in global perspective. It was a very successful seminar. We have alumni and whatnot. He and I developed that together. It was a wonderful thing. And even now, I'm collaborating with a younger colleague, Emily Scarbeck is her name, offering a course on race and inequality in American society. And she's an economist by training, but very broad-minded economist. And she and I have collaborated. That collaboration has been very fruitful. So I'm thinking teaching, I don't have a title yet, but a life in the university. It wouldn't be political. It would be about pedagogy and about relationship and about inspiration and what the heart of my experience as a teacher and as a student has been. I think I've got a lot of experience and I've got some good cases to work with. And, I think I could make a go of that as a project. So I'm working on developing that.
Yeah. No, that sounds like a good idea. It's especially since you can go back to the 80s and, it's a different time. 70s.
I can go back to the 70s, my man.
Right. So you can go that far. And I would love to hear about the ones from the 70s and 80s, because to me, that's a different time. And yeah, no, I would read that.
Yeah.
You've had a richer teaching life than I have in terms of collaborations and so on, because I'm kind of a one-man band. You've done co-teaching and things. It sounds interesting.
So, what else have we got here? What are you working on for your Times piece?
This is going to show how the sausage is made. I've been off for 2 weeks, and this is the day that I am supposed to pitch what I'm supposed to do next. And honestly, I work very hard on my pieces, but I don't know weeks in advance what I'm going to do. And of course, I
Wow.
have a list of possible topics, but you almost never use those. And I, at this point in this day, which is, I think we're allowed to say a Sunday, I don't know yet. And so I'm going to be walking around with my daughters and go to the farmer's market and whatever. And if I know me around after the sun goes down and I'm going to be sitting in a chair, something's going to hit me. Or this is what I feel this week. But it has not hit me yet. And I haven't written a piece for 2 weeks. And so we'll just have to see. I mean, I do language, race, music. Those are the three things I think of as the usual beats. The last thing I did was cultural. I did a thing on silent film. So I guess we're up for language or race. I'm not sure I have a race thing this week. And so I guess I'm probably going to do a language thing, in which case those are easier in a way because I can kind of pick things that I can tell the public would enjoy and that I wouldn't mind writing a little about. But I could not tell you now what that language thing is going to be. So check on me tomorrow. Yeah, that's how column writing goes.
Wow. That's on the high wire, man. There's no
You have
net.
to do it every week. Yeah, there's no net.
There's no net.
And when it's the Times, everybody's going to read it. It's a delicious challenge, but every week, it's what am I going to do? And it has to be something that somebody would want to read. So yeah, you've got me thinking already, what language thing am I going to do? It'll hit me, but it hasn't yet.
I got a question for you. It's out of the blue. I was reading something about Al Jolson the other day. I can't remember where it was, but somebody had a piece celebrating Al Jolson's contribution to musical theater and to film, because apparently one of the early talkies was an Al Jolson vehicle.
There's a new book.
That must be it. Someone was reviewing the book
out about him. Yeah, yeah.
So I want to know the McWhorter take on Al Jolson, known to me because of blackface.
Oh my God. Maybe I'll do him. Yeah.
Ah!
I would never have thought of it.
There you go, man.
Wow. He's the weirdest thing. I've seen all of his films. He was considered, quote unquote, the best entertainer in the world. And you watch him now, and it's this guy walking back and forth and yelling and screaming. And he's
the mammy guy.
The mammy guy. And he's in blackface, and you're just wondering, what was so good about this? And he didn't really work as well on film, for the most part. He was really good in a theater without amplification, where you have to shout out over the audience. There was apparently something amazing about him. But the thing about the blackface was that by the time he was doing it, which was the teens, and then you see him doing it in the 20s and a little bit into the 30s, it wasn't so much that he was being a black person as that it had become this faded gesture of what it meant to be an entertainer. The other Al Jolson is less known today, Eddie Cantor. He was almost as popular at the time. And Eddie Cantor was a much less bombastic personality. He didn't even vaguely imitate a black person the way Jolson did, especially in the teens and 20s. He would just put that stuff on and start singing these innocent little songs. It's kind of just what you did. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that. And there's all this highfalutin theory. And to be honest, I haven't read this, from what I sense, very good book yet. I doubt if Richard Bernstein is saying this. I'll bet he's Richard Bernstein. I met him at a party a few weeks ago, actually. But I doubt if he's going to say it. But there's this idea that you are hiding behind the blackness in order to express that you, as a Jewish person, were an immigrant and an outsider in the culture as well. I think that over-intellectualizes why some people were doing blackface as late as 1927 or 8. But Jolson has to be seen. And actually, the most useful Jolson is one that nobody sees. It's a film, unfortunately, it's called Mammy. But why it's important, there are about 7 that he did after the Jazz Singer, 6, is that it's the only place where you can actually see a minstrel show done. It's, it's the film is in great condition. He's in blackface, and you watch an actual minstrel show. Because for all minstrel shows are talked about, what most people are thinking about is a photograph. Have you ever actually seen one? And the only time that it was captured in sound film was the 1933 film Mammy. So it's just anthropologically fascinating to see what this staple of American entertainment was for decades. And frankly, it's egregious, but it also needs to be seen. And so I recommend Mammy rather than the Jazz Singer, which, unless you're really interested in the arcane, it's there really isn't very much sound, and whatever he does, goodness, it's from another time. And then the film that he did after that, The Singing Fool, is in very bad condition, and it's longer and even harder to get through today unless you're insane. Mammy is about a minstrel company and actually makes a certain sense. I recommend that one. It's very educational. But yes, this is the latest book about Jolson. The one that was written before this was unreadable. It had every theater he played. It was like you knew when he went to the bathroom. This will tell you about Jolson in a real way. I recommend it, having just skimmed it so far, but it's a good book.
All right, fans of The Glenn Show, you are here at the moment of creation. We have contributed to the genesis of a new effort from our colleague, John McWhorter.
I'm going to do that. I think that's...
I'm excited about it. Can't wait to read it, man. Can't wait to read it. And there's a Black Jewish complication, is there, in this story about Al Jolson and the blackface stuff?
He spoke Yiddish. And so it's not only that he's imitating a Black person, but he is a Jewish person in a time of rampant, overt anti-Semitism, imitating this Black person. And so you could think of it as very layered. Although what people are expecting is that when he's putting on the makeup, he's acting like a quote-unquote Negro. That wasn't really what he was doing by the 20s and 30s. He just put on the makeup to say, I'm going to put on a show, which seems really disgusting to us now. But even Black entertainers did it. You can see it in stormy weather. And so, it has a different meaning. It's the way grammatical forms become more abstract as time goes. There it goes. There's a language parallel. Grammatical forms bleach. And so, in a way, ironically, did blackface. See, I can do language and entertainment and race at the same time. Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, because being a little ill, I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to come up with anything.
Glad to help out. Glad to help out. This has been another Glenn and John conversation at The Glenn Show. We're at Substack.com. Feel free to become a subscriber, a paying subscriber if you're so moved. We're here every other week, and once a month we do responses to questions. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for your time, John. And I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Definitely.